Hey guys, welcome back. Welcome back. Fedora Friday number 18. I'm going to go bring in my man Brad, who's already waiting here in the lobby. Brad, how's it going?
Oh, it's going great, Luke. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, man. Wow, man, what a show. I'm sorry for you guys that are getting a little bit of a later start. I've been experimenting a little bit with these later times. Only because I recognize there might be some folks on the West Coast, right? So we know Brian Forbes on the West Coast. Robert is also in an earlier time zone. I don't know if Vancouver quite maps out. That might be consistent with Mountain Time, as well as you, Brad. I know you're at least a couple hours, I believe,
Yeah.
ahead. So it's earlier, 2 hours earlier for you. So I wanted to kind of just play around with these times. And I know this is an important movie. You know, uh, it doesn't. You don't have to be a hat person for that long to kind of see the reverence that there is for Indiana Jones. And I will admit, Raiders of the Lost Ark is not my favorite Indiana Jones film. That would be Temple of Doom, and it's probably like me being a function of when I grew up, right? So I'm kind of like I'm a child of the late '70s, so I started watching movies in the movie theater right around the mid '80s. So it was right in line with Temple of Doom. I do remember watching Temple of Doom, in the movie theater as a young child. I'll tell you, maybe a little parental guidance was needed, but it's just in line with my movie going experience. And I always had that close to the heart. But I do know Raiders of the Lost Ark, is held in high regard, obviously, because it's the one that kicked off the series. Brad, I want to let you chime in because I know you have the hat. I want to make sure we get some of your thoughts on this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm geeking out today, as you can see. Uh, a big indie fan and have been since 1980. And I agree with you. My favorite is now Temple of Doom. It actually,
Yeah,
it had been Raiders for a long time. I'm also very fond of The Last Crusade. But as I've
yeah,
gotten older, I've come to appreciate Temple of Doom, and that Spielberg was trying to, and even Lucas was trying to do something just a little bit different to push the limits. And yeah, there are a couple of silly things there that kind of stand out, but I can forgive those now because I don't know, I love that film. It's one of my favorites.
absolutely, absolutely. And obviously, we can't go off without doing a little bit of a hat check. I'll let you guys introduce. I'll let you introduce your hat. I think it's a little bit more faithful rendition than mine, but I'll introduce mine after. Yeah,
Hey, Ian. Yeah, this is a Herbert Johnson, a Raiders fedora. I got it a couple of years ago. It
yeah.
was a 5 month wait from when I ordered it, and I'm
Wow.
glad I ordered it then because they're a lot more expensive today.
Yeah,
Um, and then this is a Wested Raiders jacket that I just got last month. So
yeah.
uh, I'm kind of, like I said, geeking out here.
Hey, I
This is
love
all
it.
I
I
have for
love
the costume. Well, and some
it.
khaki pants, but
Yeah. Are they still referring to this? Is a question for you, Brad. Are they still referring it to as the poet? Because I believe that's the original model name. I just want to make sure they're still referring to it as that, or maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I just got that in.
uh, I'll have to go look and see on their website because I can't remember. They do, I think, refer to it as the poet,
Yeah,
but they've really gone all in on the Indiana Jones
makes
uh,
sense. Yeah, that's
aspect
exactly
of it.
why
So
I
they
asked.
don't emphasize the poet, though they do talk about the poet. Say, yeah, this was the original model that was used.
Yeah, yeah, and wow, I don't want to even like go into the name, but I remember the cost. I'm reading up on Chat GPT about the costume designer, Deborah. It's a couple
Nadoolman.
names. Yeah, and then but Steven Spielberg and Deborah kind of both got on the same page that the poet model that Herbert Johnson was going to be the provider. Obviously, Herbert Johnson is a storied brand based out of the UK, right? A London-based brand all the way
Yeah,
back to the 1800s. They selected this company and also selected this model for Indiana Jones. So it's kind of like you got to love it when you got two folks, two creators on the same side, and they're pushing for that same thing. And who knows what's right behind the scenes if they had kind of an argument or like, no, I want this one, I want this. But ultimately, like you can't imagine, right? It's like in hindsight, you're like, imagine Indiana Jones in any other type of hat other than the Indy hat, right?
Right.
It's kind of
Exactly.
hard. It's like it's probably not even the same movie. And that's really at the heart of Fedora Friday, when you have a situation where a movie where the hat is almost like a separate character in and of itself.
Yeah.
And it really does hold that nuance. And just to kind of make sure I don't skip over, I am wearing not a Herbert Johnson. This is a Kavanaugh with the Kavanaugh
Nice.
edge. It's a blue onyx model. If I remember that correctly, I didn't really check. I just threw it on because it's my most indie hat that I own. But it's not really an indie hat at all. It definitely doesn't have anywhere near the height that I need. But I feel a little bit like Indiana Jones when I put this one on. So I wore this one. And we're both fans of the Hat Corporation of America. So at least I feel
that's a classy hat.
Oh, thank you. Definitely I appreciate
classy
it.
Hat.
But man, I tell you, in terms of like, this is a movie that I waited quite a while. Like, it's like the last of the movie suggestions that I had originally put up on the YouTube channel when I was taking suggestions with a poll. So I covered every movie that I've put in there as an option, I believe. This is the last one. And it's always because every single week I'm like, well, maybe I'll do this. And then I'll backtrack because I'm like, you know what? This is such a big thing. And then you kind of already know I will go and I will intend to do more research and do it justice, but it'll never happen because, my ADHD kicks in and ultimately I procrastinate. And I'm like, you know what? Screw it. This is the last one. Let me just get it over with. And I was hoping that, obviously I was a little disappointed that we couldn't get Paul, obviously, as a British-based hatter, but I knew how much of a big Indiana Jones fan you were. So when you said you were going to be part of this, I really was really pleased because I wanted to have some of that credibility because, well, ultimately, as being somebody that's not as big of a fan of this film as opposed to Temple of Doom, I wanted to make sure that I had some credibility here, and maybe, because sometimes I'm like, a lot of the movies I've been huge fans of. This one, I'm like, okay, I like the movie. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of it, and I want to make sure that I had like kind of that yin and yang to cover this.
Yeah. This is my first Fedora Friday talk.
Yeah.
Usually because two reasons. Seen most of the other films, though I've seen a few of them that you discussed.
Right.
But I'm also quite busy. I have meetings on Fridays and class. So I can't do the Fridays. But today's my last Friday of winter break, so I'm off and I can attend this one. So I'm glad you chose this one for today because next week I wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, there you go. The stars aligned. You see that? Every single time. That's the nice thing about having such a network here already in that that board of directors, that we have such a wide coverage of movie likes, right? I remember a few weeks back, it might have been more than a few weeks, but I did the Blues Brothers, and Robert had chimed in. I don't know if you were part of the group still when that happened, but Robert was like, I hate that film, and like that's why I skipped it. And I was like, Robert, like, that would have been really useful to have someone that really didn't like it. Obviously, as long as we're respectful on screen, which I don't have no doubt that we would be. But you could be representing that viewer, that hat person. And you know what? Not a big fan, because I love the movie.
Yeah. Oh, I love that movie too.
Yeah. And then we got Nathan here with a look at these two studs.
Nathan.
I appreciate it, my man. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah. Always nice to get a compliment. Like I said, I always say, no matter what, compliments are not just for one gender. Everybody loves compliments. So I appreciate that. I'm going to go in, right, obviously, to couch this. You guys, have you guys been watching Fedora Fridays lately, especially? I've been doing a lot more urban movies, right? So something like Crush Groove, which featured Run DMC. These are like the two pillars, right? Indiana Jones and Run DMC in the 80s were a lot of they took a lot of the credit for bringing back the fedora on screen, and obviously in terms of like the well, on screen and also on TV in terms of MTV, right, for Run DMC. So obviously for me, as somebody that grew up in Brooklyn and a fan of rap music, Run DMC was definitely there. And in Indiana Jones, even though I did love the Temple of Doom, I never really thought of it as a hat movie until I became a hat person. And then I was like, yes, of course, and the High Crown, right? So obviously the movie set in the 1930s. So, you guys already know 1930s, you're going to get some of that fedora action, that High Crown fedora action that people so love. And, for me, I don't know. There's something different about the Indiana Jones fedora. And, the main point, besides the High Crown, are the two front dents. And I don't know I don't know historically, Brad, in terms of where that had its origins. I don't know if that's something that you're aware of in terms of like where those two front dents, because they're not something that is seen all over the place. And I always wanted to know, was that something that was maybe popular in the 30s and I just didn't, I wasn't aware, but it's different than the side dents, right? The two front dents are very different than the side dents. And I never knew what the origins of that were, or where that came from.
It was the costume designer, Deborah Nadoolman.
Gotcha.
The hat itself is not really a period correct hat.
Right.
It gets some things right, like a taller crown.
Right.
Brims were starting to get a little wider by 1936, but the really wide brims that we think of like this don't really come until about 1940 and into the 40s, and so the wider brims are one's over 2.5 inches wide, are a little bit later. So it's not like they were trying to evoke something historically accurate. And that's one of the things I ran into when I was, looking up the Indiana Jones jacket to order. It was acknowledged that it's not historically accurate for the 30s either. It was just something that they wanted. Spielberg liked it, Nadoolman liked it, and they went with it. And it does become so iconic. So I think, the pinch, especially this really tight pinch in the front, is not typical. You would see that develop naturally if people just tended to, grab their hats here and pinch them over time. And maybe that's what they were going for, the lived-in look. But generally that wasn't a stylistic choice that people made back in the 30s.
Yeah. And then obviously the other thing that jumped out at me, because there was also a commonality with Run DMC, is the matching of the fedora with the leather jacket. That is something, again, I don't know. I'm going to go with, if I had to guess, it wasn't period appropriate. I don't know. It didn't seem like something that people were doing in the 30s, but maybe they were. Do you have any kind of historical basis for that fedora leather jacket connection?
Yeah, you do see this in other films from like the 40s and 50s. I don't know if any 30s films necessarily you see that. And of course I can't think of it now. There was one film in particular with Charlton Heston that really kind of inspired the look of Indiana Jones, and I cannot think of the name.
Movie with Charlton Heston. Wow, I should.
But I wish I could remember it. Somebody will
chime in with it. And then
but,
Nathan,
with leather jackets, Nathan, with leather jackets, I don't think they came in colors besides maybe brown and black, and I don't know how popular they were among, say, the working class anyway. But it makes sense that it's a color combination that works. For me, and I think this is again the costume designer and Spielberg, looking for those earth tones. He's an archaeologist, so he digs in the dirt, and earth tones are very, not a pardon the pun, but it's down to earth, a very organic look. and so I think it was only natural that they went with brown.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's you know, that you hit on it, right? This is when that fedora and the costuming becomes so important. And we've talked about it probably more so when we were talking about things like The Godfather and a lot of films of that ilk, where they use color and also well, I'm just gonna go and start with just color, because the color, and that's what you hit on right there, that brown, right? So the hero wears brown, and it's something, right? We know that Indiana Jones is an archaeologist, right? He is very, you know, and maybe he doesn't start off as being respectful, right? Because we know the opening scene for Raiders, you know, he's basically stealing some of these artifacts, right? And maybe that's not something that, you know, I'm just thinking archaeologists, they're excavating, they're taking these things, and then usually they're finding their way, but he's doing it for profit, right? Because he's selling them. I think that's something they cover right in the beginning. He's selling these to make a buck. And so maybe that's not exactly the moral high ground, but he is somebody that definitely has a lot more respect for these artifacts and their power, right? So like the mystique and the occult, than let's say his arch nemesis there, Belloc, right?
Yeah.
Rene Belloc, who's like a Frenchman, right? He has a lighter color. He has lighter colors, which, you know, don't necessarily signify that he's a good person. They signify mainly that he's kind of like you know, I don't know, maybe a little bit ambiguous, right? Morally ambiguous would be somebody that you would describe Belloc, right? He's not the villain per se that you know, Tote. Is that Tote? That Tote is, right? He's obviously in black. He's presenting that menace. But Belloc is kind of like that morally ambiguous person, right? So, like, obviously, if you look at my Fedora Fridays, oh, we got Nathan. What's up, Nathan?
All right, Nathan. Hey.
How's it going, my friend? Can you hear me? Hopefully this is it sounds like you can't hear us. Hopefully this is coming through. Nathan, we'll wait for you to get your audio and sync. It could just be that the audio settings, remember with the software that I have, the audio settings sometimes are a little bit wonky. So we'll wait for Nathan. Nathan, you just chime in whenever you have your audio set up. But yeah, essentially that Belloc character represents moral ambiguity, and obviously with Tote, he represents that menace. But the use of color, I just think, is so awesome. And let's just stick with Indiana Jones himself, right? Because Indiana Jones, when you see him up right in the beginning of the scene, you see him in all brown. But once he gets back to the university, he doesn't have that brown. It's almost like a uniform, like a superhero uniform. He's wearing more gray colors, right? He's wearing the suit with the gray hat, a little bit more kind of gentlemanly, I guess, would be the term.
Yeah.
And I love that.
He's dressed like a college professor.
Correct. He has, I think, a tweed outfit in there teaching the course. And I love it because, one, I'm a big fan of that. I don't have a tweed suit, but gentlemen like James Bond, who comes on here, Jim, as we know him on Facebook, they dress up to the nines. They have those tweed suits, and they look so sharp with a nice fedora. And one day I'll get myself a nice tweed suit, and I'll look a little scholarly. But yeah, so you can see that kind of that uniform that Indy chooses to wear when he's out in the field. That's different. It's almost like I said, like his superhero costume. And I love it.
Right.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, we can hear you,
my friend.
Hey, Nathan.
All right, how you doing, Brad? Luke, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
My friend. Doing well. Are you on the road again?
Well, actually, I'm in my son's little vehicle. He was saying there were some issues with it, so I said, well, let me test drive it and see.
Oh, that's awesome.
If I can do some Indiana Jones magic on it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's such a nice thing. I remember doing that for my son. You know, and every once in a while, he has a newer car now, but when he had a used car, you know, when there was no problem, you know, that's when I see him come around, you know, and then, you know, and after that, you're like, you know, a lover of all things machines, you know, you may not be able to fix it, but you're like, I'm going to diagnose this. And it's kind of like a father-son project, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
I tell you, man, this has been a car problem week. I just replaced the power steering on my wife's car,
Oh.
and
Oh man.
then my son. Now the heater core did start leaking, so I said, well, let's bypass it, and then we'll because we have to take out the whole dash, and that's just a
Yeah.
nightmare job. I said, well,
Oh
we'll
yeah.
wait for a nice sunny day, and we'll get that done.
Yeah.
Today I'm wearing my KTG Roadstar. I'm gonna tell you, man, this hat. I mean, it just feels it's just comfort food, right?
Yeah.
And it's so versatile. I love this Roadstar.
I
That's
like
Um,
great.
that brim length. What's the size on that brim?
so this is a 2 3/4. It's really modeled after a open road. It
Yeah.
comes actually open crown, and I shaped a
Okay.
cat. I shaped one of the worst cattleman creases that I possibly could. But you know what? It's my cattleman crease, and I'll deal with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
No, no, it looks
it's
good. It
so
It's
looks
great.
versatile. I can wear it all down, all up, for a casual day. I can wear it with a suit
yeah.
if
Oh
I wear
yeah.
it down. Yeah, so it's much like today's feature. I tell you what, man, I watched this movie the other day, not knowing that you were going to do this today,
Wow.
but that opening scene. That's got to be one of the most captivating. As a young
Yeah.
person, when I
Yeah.
saw that, I remember, man, this thing was that little first 10 or 15 minutes was like it just grabbed you,
Yeah.
and I think that made many of us just Indiana Jones fans. And
Yep.
this
Yeah.
was like a complete, like, man, he's the hero, like he's going to get it
Yeah.
done.
He's
But
the man.
as I mentioned earlier, like, the guy's so relatable. Even in that scene, like he goes to jump across, and he doesn't make it, and he's got to hang on and crawl up, and just throughout the series, he makes mistakes, and
Correct.
he's human. He's not like some of these newer movies where
Infallible.
somebody's jumping 30 feet from car to car, and
Yeah.
like it's like everybody's got this superhuman human strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's very relatable. I think we can all relate to the struggles that he has and how he overcomes them.
Yeah.
But just a wonderful pick for today, and I think the hat that he has is so versatile. I think you
Yeah.
were just mentioning that, right? He's got
Yeah.
this composed, like in a suit, and he's going around, but then, like, I don't know what it is. He flipped the brim down, or like he just
Yeah.
tilts it. Something happens. He turns the switch on, and he's
Exactly.
just the adventurer in all of us. I think you were just speaking of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Nathan. And like I was talking, it really is as subtle as even a color change, because I believe one of the fedoras, it looks exactly like the indie fedora, but it's just gray,
It's
right?
gray.
So the idea of
Yeah.
like the staunch, like
Sea flame
stuffy,
gray.
like professorial color, and then you just switch it to brown. All of a sudden, he's like a man about town, and like the guy that's out there for adventure. And I love it because it's kind of like that whole idea of, like, when you watch Superman, you're like, how do they not know this is not Superman? All he's got is like glasses on, right? And maybe like a suit, and everything else he screams. Maybe the little front curl is up, he doesn't have it down. Other than that, I'm like, how do they not know this is Superman? But
Yep.
it goes to show you how a little bit of a change. And I always talk about this because wearing a hat out in public, I know there are things that I've done, and I've talked about them on screen here, where I will go defend somebody, right? If I see somebody in trouble, I will go defend them. I've talked about it here where, I've gone out at least on 2 separate occasions that I talked about it on stream, where I saw somebody in trouble and I went to intervene. And again, I don't recommend doing that. That's not something that I'm telling you to go put on a hat and be a vigilante. It's like, it was more like, I'm going to go and see if I can go and talk somebody from making a bad decision, and hopefully not get hurt myself. But I don't think I would have done those or been as amenable to doing it if I didn't feel like I had the hat on. And I got to tell you, at least on one and maybe both occasions, that I think the hat kind of saved my bacon, because I don't know, somebody sees somebody with a hat coming towards their way, maybe they think twice, right? And maybe that's all it takes, right? Maybe they're not, right? They didn't intend to do harm, but just seeing the hat might make somebody think twice, and maybe I can save them from going to jail or worse, right?
Right.
You never know.
Brad, do you have a gray Indiana Jones fedora? Give us some insight into that piece of clothing.
Oh, the gray one? No, I don't have a gray one. I did actually back in '84, I think for my birthday. Stetson was tied in with Temple of Doom at that point,
Yeah,
and they issued their first Temple hat, and they
right.
had them in brown or the mink, and then in the gray. And so my parents got me the gray one because I already had a brown
Interesting.
Stetson. But
So
it's
was that done by, so that particular hat, that wasn't a Herbert John, it was a Stetson, or do you know?
Oh no,
well,
I think it was Herbert Johnson, but I think Stetson decided to
Stetson.
put out a model, right?
Okay.
Because I don't know if they ever did one for the movies, but I could be wrong.
yeah, Stetson got a license to produce hats
Gotcha.
for a tie into the film. And I'm not an Indiana Jones hat expert by any means, but um, supposedly Stetson got the product placed in the film in one shot. And
Gotcha.
I think people have thought maybe that it is in the airplane in the Ford Tri-Motor that there's a clip of him wearing a Stetson. I don't
Right.
know. I couldn't verify it whether there's actually a Stetson in the film or not. But because they got the license, they got
Yeah.
to produce those. And of course, Dorfman Pacific did as well. Dorfman made wool versions,
Right.
and then Stetson made the fur felt ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a gray one, but the silverfish unfortunately got to it a long time ago. So,
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah.
yeah.
I can imagine basically. So we talked about this earlier, Nathan, that, the original model that was selected for the movie for Raiders was called by the Poet model by Herbert Johnson. But obviously when the movie became really big, and obviously we had the sequels, like for me, I got introduced with the sequel, Temple of Doom. And that's always my favorite because that was my first Indiana Jones movie. I watched Raiders after I saw Temple of Doom. And, obviously Stetson, realizing they called it the Temple. So for me, I'm like, okay, so they also capitalized on that idea of Temple of Doom because they called it the Temple. They didn't call it the Raiders.
Interesting.
I mean, I'm guessing here because I'm
Yeah.
called Temple. They didn't.
I know
don't think
that-
they got to it.
I know that there is a huge in that circle. I'm not real privy to it, but in that circle of the cosplay and the real big Indiana Jones, there's this whole debate, right, about the Ark hat, the Temple hat, the Crusader hat, and how it's different, and there's a whole thing about that. And I kind of like the Temple. I mean, I haven't literally studied it and looked into it a whole lot, but what screenshots I've seen, I'm like, I kind of like that Temple hat. I don't know what it is, but I think to the average viewer, they all just kind of look the same. So
yeah, I mean, to me, they look more of the same. Again, I don't own an actual race. This is a Kavanaugh. This is nowhere close to a Temple hat, but it's as close as I have to a Temple, a Indy hat. And ultimately, one thing we talked about before you joined, Nathan, was the pairing of the fedora, right? The high crown fedora with the two front dents, right? And Brad explained that wasn't necessarily period appropriate, right? But it was a decision they made to give Indy that look and pairing it with that leather jacket because, in the Fedora Lounge, which, I know Robert's a member of, Brad is a member of, there is a very, very, besides the hat subforum, there's a very outerwear section, and they focus a lot on leather jackets in that forum. And I started becoming part of that forum and becoming a little bit more active because there's another gentleman also called Nathan, different Nathan. He goes by, I believe, I always screw this up. He's either the Lost Cowboy or the Last Cowboy, one of those. And he posted pictures of his leather jackets with his fedoras. And then I found out, he also posts in this forum. And I really like the combo. And I think Indiana Jones, as well as Run DMC, now again, different leather type of outfit, but the leather jacket fedora combo, because a lot of folks, they don't realize that they can look really good in combination. And I think Indy really brought it home.
Well, I tell you, I just signed up for that Fedora Lounge, although I haven't really gotten on there a whole lot. But
Yeah.
I do have a Cordoba brown Stratoliner that when I wear it, they're like, oh, you know, Indiana Jones, and I do have a very nice leather jacket. So Luke, maybe I'll do that my first post on the Fedora Lounge in my brown calfskin leather jacket, vintage, by the way,
All
with
right.
my Cordoba brown Stetson Stratoliner.
I love it. I love it. I think you're going to find that there's a wealth of information on that forum. Obviously, I haven't been on there as long as Brad or Robert, but I just found that you are kind of like with other, and obviously you get characters, right? Like everywhere, you'll get some characters that are a little bit more, like for me, I've always been a big fan of the Stingy Brim, and you're not going to find those folks there that big of the stingy. They'll have stinginess, right? Where they'll go during the holidays. They'll do the the days of stinginess. But otherwise, they're a big fan of the traditional fedora, the high crown. So the Indiana Jones, they get a lot of love there. So I think you're gonna like it. Shout out to the Fedora Lounge, by the way.
Well, I'll do that, and I'll jump off here, and I can't wait for your Fedora Friday review. I love these. Always look forward to them. Brad, such a pleasure to share screen time with you and Luke as well.
As always, yep.
So I will catch you guys same bat channel. Well, what is it? Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right, guys.
Good luck with that.
Take care, Nathan.
The car issues, but my friend.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
All right, cheers. All right. Well, Nathan,
I was going to say,
folks. Yeah.
It's too bad Nathan had to get off. I was going to tell him that actually my favorite of the indie hats is the Temple of Doom hat because it does not have the tight crease on it. It actually looks more period correct.
Right.
And so when I can pull the money together, I think that'll be the next hat I order from Herbert Johnson is one of their temple hats. But it's any of the indie hats I just love.
Yeah, I love that because again, it goes to show you that movie, and I'll tell you that if you watch a lot of 80s movies, because I'll rewatch a lot of 80s movies, and usually the first thing I'll come away with is, wow, they're never gonna make that movie again. Right? And I talked about that, right? There's so many like what I call non-PC topics that were done in the 80s that you're like, there's no way. We've gone too far in this idea of like political correctness. There's no way they'll make those again. So in a way, it's kind of like, wow, you appreciate it from that standpoint, but you also see a lot of the copying, right? So like the folks that made movies in the 80s, they were fans of other movies. Probably also made in the 80s. And Indiana Jones is a one of those films that always, because of the music, right? Dun, 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 dun. You see that throughout the 80s and 90s and subsequent, like the nod to that, because that music even is so iconic.
Yep.
So I mean, needless to say, like this movie, especially for folks, I think our age, Brad, I'm going to put us in the same age bracket because I think once you said that Temple of Doom, because I was ready for like, oh no, Raiders is the best, right? For me, I had to say, well, no, Temple of Doom. I have to be completely honest. Temple of Doom was the one that got me introduced to the franchise, and maybe for good reason. Maybe because of the power, the initial buzz that they got from Raiders. They poured so much resources into marketing Temple of Doom. And I got to tell you, I haven't rewatched Temple of Doom for a little bit. I'm going to rewatch it and maybe I'll cover it. So maybe I'll give you a little chance to get that Temple of Doom, Herbert Johnson, Brad, and then we'll cover Temple of Doom because I'm anxious because I really want to watch it again with the lens of, okay, I saw Raiders as a hat person. Now I'm going to watch Temple of Doom as a hat person. And then ultimately we'll get to The Last Crusade and even to the newer ones. Ultimately, even though I'm not as big of, or I didn't get excited about those as I did for Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. So what I'll do is I will show some photos. I'll throw a slideshow. Brad, feel free to chime in because I got to tell you, I mean, I'm watching this and like there's so much of this, and obviously this came out in 1981, so this was really setting the tone for the 80s. In my standpoint, in terms of like when it came out. So when you look through these, and then we talk a little bit about the story, hopefully it starts ringing a little bell, because for me, I'm like, wow, this is such a movie based on like morality, right? The morality of some of the topics that we're talking about is really big here. So let me just I'll bring up the slideshow. And that way the audience, and just in case you've been living under a rock and you don't know what Indiana Jones looks like, you can see here kind of like that full uniform. This might not be the best photo to show the whole thing, but I want to give you that whole shebang, right? From top to bottom. Man, what a badass, right? This is a badass uniform.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Like you see somebody like this and you're like, that guy could do anything. He's got the wit. Like you're not gonna mess with this guy, you know?
Right.
And he's a nerdy professor. The thing about it is that his day job is a mild mannered archaeology professor, but he wears this and he looks badass.
Yeah, and I love that dichotomy, the juxtaposition of the college professor in the tweeds and then the rough and tumble archaeologist.
Yeah,
that was designed so brilliantly. And you can easily believe that they're both sides of the same man,
right?
And they don't clash. They don't, you don't understand. Well, how can he be one and also the other?
Right.
It just makes perfect sense.
And this is like where I feel like obviously we had that kinship, you and I, Brad, in terms of like being researchers by trade. Right? The idea of knowledge is power, right?
Right.
His superpower is that he's so knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Like that's how he's able to get in and out of these situations, is because his research ability, his brain, and his knowledge of the occult and history is what gives him the edge over his competitors.
Yeah.
And you gotta love that as a nerd, right? You gotta love the fact that that's his super. It's almost like the Incredible Hulk. His arch nemesis was the leader, right? I believe it was called the leader. He had the gamma rays, but it affected his brain. So you're sitting there and you're like, as a nerd, you're like, yeah, super brain power versus super brawn, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes you respect the fact that, Hulk is in trouble because somebody with superior brain power, and it's very similar for Superman, because Lex Luthor, right, the villain in Superman, Lex Luthor fashions himself as a brilliant mind, right? He's gonna outwit Superman.
Yeah.
He can't outmuscle him, but he can outwit him. And that is, I think, is the part of the allure of Indiana Jones, is that this guy's superpower is his brain power.
Right. Right.
And he could do it all. Like he has like he's not physically incapable, but he's gonna outwit you first. And that I think for somebody like myself, and I'm gonna just speak for you, Brad, and I'll let you disagree if you like, but I feel like for us, for our those nerds out there, that's why Indiana Jones and this fedora, like when we don this fedora, you really respect this character.
Yeah, he makes nerds cool. And it makes nerds badass. I mean, you normally don't think nerds and badass go together. But he does. And, like you said, using his brain, the perfect example of this is the very end of the film when he says to Marion, close your eyes and, don't open them.
Correct.
Because he is able to outthink, Belloc and the Nazis. And so they managed to survive. And, he doesn't let the intuition or the passion get the better of him. He says, no, we got to go with, I'm sure he wanted to actually see what was going to happen, but he knew, no, we got to survive this. So
correct. And the thing about it, and this is the point that Nathan shared, he's not infallible, right? Like in several situations in the movie, you see him make mistakes, right? Even in the beginning, he thought, right, he's weighing the right? He's weighing everything out to replace the statue with, and he's eyeballing it, right? Or using interocular analysis, as I like to call it. you know, he's using intraocular analysis to eyeball this this way, and then he makes a mistake, and he ultimately has to run for his life.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, superior brain power, but at the same time, he's not infallible. And it's one of those things where the vulnerable hero, right? Just like that vulnerable boxer, that boxer that is not undefeated, he goes and he loses even a few fights, but you just admire the way he goes about his business, even in the face of mistakes and losses, is one of those things where it makes this guy so real.
He just doesn't give up. That's what makes him tough.
Tenacity.
He doesn't give up.
Yeah. Tenacity. I love that. I think that's, I didn't even think about that, but when you mentioned it, I was like, yes, this guy is tenacious.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll scroll through some more photos because, again, you know, another an action shot, and you know, the guys that really are fans of Westerns, this look doesn't look out of place, right? It's kind of like a look that's kind of right there for the foot. It scratches that itch for those that really love that Western, and then obviously the high crown fedora for those folks that like the gangster films of the 30s. It really does. You can tell that they knew what they were doing when they came up with this outfit.
Yep. And what I find interesting about Last Crusade is the addition of the tie.
Yes.
And I'm trying to remember if he wore it in Dial of Destiny. I think he did have a tie in Dial of Destiny. But you know, we didn't see the tie in Raiders or Temple of Doom, except you know, the bow ties he's wearing when he's in a suit. So here to have a tie with his archaeologist persona was an interesting choice, and yet it worked.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, Brad. And you know what? For me, I think that some of those details, right, and you see it with The Godfather Part 2, right? It's like, for me, Godfather Part 2 even surpasses Part 1. And you're like, well, you know, Godfather Part 1 was like, and I mentioned it before, an accidental masterpiece. But Godfather Part 2 was very much an intentional masterpiece.
Yes.
And I feel like that the same thing holds with Indiana Jones, because, you know, you make a movie, it's the first one in the series, you're like, who knows if anybody will even go watch this thing. But after it became a phenomenon, you see the attention and detail that it went into crafting the second and the third installment, and then obviously subsequent to that. And then you're like, wow, they really, of course, because some of that initial success is like, okay, now we can really go and try to hit a home run with these subsequent efforts. And I feel like those details are some of them. And I'll get to those, a couple other ones. There's one hat related detail that I'll mention, because I don't believe, and I'll have you, Brad, to check me on this. The Fez doesn't make an appearance on Salah until the Crusade. I don't remember Salah. Was Salah in Temple of Doom? I know he was in the Last Crusade.
No.
Okay.
I think he wears one in Cairo in Raiders.
Okay. So there you go. I pulled a photo of Salah with the Fez, and I couldn't recall if I saw him with it in Raiders. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because maybe the photo is from Raiders, because he looked young, right? You know, obviously I forget how many years it was between Raiders and the Last Crusade, but I'm like, that Salah looks pretty young after. Yeah. So so maybe I did pull one from Raiders. I wanted to qualify just in case I was wrong, but I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll show that when I get to Salah, a little bit later. But yeah, so you get a feel for this character here in his outfit, and you're like, okay, the leather, the fedora, the whole thing is kind of like, this is a superhero. Yeah. And and the most part, like the hat, that's the other thing about the hat being a character. This hat goes through so many like adventures, right? Like the hat gets beat up pretty bad. Right, like it gets choked. Right, at some point he jumps into the water to escape the tribe in that opening scene, and he's going to get his friend who's waiting in the plane and fishing while he's there running for his life, and he jumps in the water and the hat gets completely soaked. So you can see already right from the get-go, this hat goes through hell.
I always picture
right back.
Yeah. I always pictured him with a closet full of hats. They're all the same, and he just grabs a new one each adventure, because you're wondering, how in the heck can that hat survive all of that?
Correct. And sometimes that's the thing about wearing a hat, is that you know, even though we tend to baby them, right? Like I have a lot of hats. I tend to try to baby my hats. And maybe I don't go as far as some folks. You know, I don't do anything but like brush them, as often as I can. You know, obviously with a lot of hats, you can't brush them as often because you got a lot of them. But for this hat, it really kind of shows you the resiliency, because that's what we talked about. Indiana Jones, resilient, right? He's tenacious. Yeah. This hat, also resilient, also tenacious. It's going to take a beating to keep going.
Right, right.
So you can see here how the character and the hat kind of like, obviously he wore this hat. This hat can do it all, just like Indy can do it all.
Yeah. Yep.
I love it.
I think that's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah, I just love it. And it's one of those things, like I said, and it always looks good on, you know what I mean? Like, no matter what kind of situation, whether he has it down, I think at some point you see him on an airplane. I think this is when he's on his way to Nepal. Right in the beginning, he's there. He was at the university. He gets recruited to go on this mission. He finds his way to Nepal first to go meet up with Marion. And he takes the hat and puts it Frank Sinatra style, right? Remember we talked about the back of the head? Because he's dozing off. And at some point you can see that he's like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit relaxed. He just takes the hat, flips it back, and he wears it Frank Sinatra style, and it still looks great.
Yeah.
Love it. I love those nods. As a hat wearer, you're like, wow, that rings true to me.
Yep.
And this is that scene that we talked about when he's looking at this artifact. He knows what he needs to do because of his superior, right? His superior research ability. And it really does highlight perfectly well, like that hat, right? So you can see that big old crown on his hat, that nice big ribbon, that nice brim length. And he's there like, okay, what have I not accounted for here? And he's there like sizing up this object because he's going to eyeball the weight of this object. And I love it. It just, look at that face. It's a man at work.
Yeah. You see the gears turning.
Right? Or the ultimate. You know, it's life. He knows that he's making a life or death choice here.
Yeah, literally.
Literally. So it just gets you that point because, you know, right, it's a very stereotypical guy thing, right? To be able to be calm and cool under pressure, right?
Yep.
The idea is that, you know, that cool cat, right? And you see right off the bat, right in the beginning of this movie, that this guy, like, it almost like, don't you know that you could die? And you wouldn't know it by the look of it. He's like, yep, I'm just going to make a decision and whatever happens is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to live with the consequences.
Correct. And this is kind of like that point when he does the switcheroo. He's like obviously focused, but at some point I'm doing, like, he's not like, there's no hesitation really. He's like, I'm going to do this. It's just a question of like, do I make any last minute adjustments? And you gotta love this, like as a guy, especially as a kid, right? So if you're watching this as a kid, you know, because I watched Temple first, then I watched Raiders, and I'm watching this, and I gotta be thinking, wow, this is what guys do. Right? Like, sometimes guys gotta go and make life or death decisions. You know, and obviously, you know, that does happen sometimes, but luckily, you don't have to make those decisions as often as Indy does.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
I know.
So, you know, it's just one of those things I'm like, wow, you know, because it's like we talked about like watching, you know, me growing up watching my dad as the role model. But besides my dad, I was watching folks like Harrison Ford, you know, obviously Sylvester Stallone and Rocky, as well as Rambo. And then you got Arnold Schwarzenegger. And you're like, wow, this represents masculinity. And obviously there are others. These are what's like to be masculine, and you're sitting there like, man, what a man, right? It's like I want to be like that.
Exactly, but you know, to compare '80s action heroes, Indy still stands above Rocky, Rambo, and Stallone, Schwarzenegger's characters.
Yeah,
because in many cases, they were still a little bit larger than life, more superhero-ish, and Indy is still
that
everyman, just an average guy, and I think that makes him more relatable
Yes.
in many ways than a lot of the other typical action stars of the
Yeah.
80s that you see.
Correct. And relatable because one would, you know, and I know as a college professor, like that's something your parents would approve of. Maybe your parents wouldn't be as approving of you of becoming a war hero. You know what I mean? Like if you tell your parents, I say this because I used to work with military folks, and I'd go and survey both youth as well as their parents in determining how likely these youth are to join the military and how likely the parents are to recommend the military to their children. So you can imagine it's not a very popular choice to want to say, hey, I want my child to go to the military, even though you support the troops and you do that. But if you say, Mom and Dad, I want to become a college professor, like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So this goal, and the fact is, Schwarzenegger and Stallone were using brawn. Like they weren't known for their brain power.
Right.
Indy is known, his superpower is his brain power. Yeah. So I don't know, for the nerd in me, like that nerd growing up in Brooklyn, or that budding nerd, like this is a guy's like, wow, I can sink my teeth into this character.
Yeah, you can picture yourself as that character. You know, you can't picture yourself as Rocky or Rambo.
Correct.
You know, but you can as Indiana Jones, and I think it's that relatability that. That's
agreed. It just seems attainable. And again, the fact that the character makes these mistakes, like we mentioned before, and still comes out okay. Like there's besides the fact that it's believable, it's a good lesson in life, a good life lesson, right? You're gonna make mistakes. Sometimes it's more important to be decisive than it is to be correct.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think Indiana Jones really harps on that. And I think it's a good, if you're letting your kid watch something, it's not a bad thing per se. Let me just put it this way: there's worse things that you can let your kid watch than Indiana Jones. I think
that's true.
So yeah, he does the switcheroo. Like again, I these cued in only because they highlight the hat so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what. Brad, do you have an idea of how tall the Indy crown, more or less? Because it's a tall crown.
I think I remember from my days of talking with Steve Delk from Adventure Built Hats that it was 5 3/4 open crown.
Gotcha. Wow.
So I'm not exactly sure. I think it's around there. I know there has been a lot of argument about that. Some are saying, oh, it's 6. And I remember, people saying, no, it's even taller than that. And some people would order them taller than that. And it just, but I think it was around 5 3/4 is what Steve Delk told me. And I would trust his judgment because he was really an expert on them.
Yeah, and I believe the name is Adventure Built. Is that correct?
Adventure Built, yeah.
Because they were licensed, weren't they, to also make the Indy hat?
They were the ones hired by Lucasfilm to make the hats for Crystal Skull.
Gotcha. Okay,
which is really cool experience for them. I know a frustrating one too.
Understood.
Yeah.
I always think that's got to be a kind of a weird experience to kind of follow up, right? To be the costume, like to provide the costume for a follow-up effort, because there's so many expectations. Like, well, Herbert Johnson did, XYZ, Well, we're not Herbert Johnson, right? But yeah, because the ribbon also, like, it's not a thin ribbon. And that's the other thing, that's the other part of the equation. We talked about that often, is that width of the ribbon sometimes can tame a crown that's that tall. I mean, we're talking about almost half a foot of crown, all told. So, man.
Yeah, it's not a wide ribbon. The stereotypical ribbons of the 20s and early 30s were 2 inches.
Yeah.
And it's not quite that, but it's perfectly proportioned for this hat.
Correct. It's just, like I said, it's about, you sit there and you're thinking like any taller crown and it would look out of place, but this is like that sweet spot. It's like, all right, that's a tall crown, but it doesn't look off.
Yeah. I was going to show you. I've shown this. I've worn this one before. This is my Dobbs. It needs to be dusted, but this is actually a Dobbs from 1936, a Dobbs
all right.
model, and I've left it in the creasing that came with it. It could stand a reblocking at some point, but it's like, no, it's got character. But this has the 2-inch ribbon, and so it's this is more like, I think, what you might have seen Indy in 36, which there's not, they look close enough to me. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's the point. Part of the point that we kind of we were alluding to before is that there are some real nerds out there about like the Indy hat. Like they will go and they will argue, and that's one of those beautiful. I mean, obviously you don't like to see people arguing, and getting rude with each other, but they're passionate. I guess that's the term that I want to say. They're passionate about things, about these details.
Right.
And you gotta love it, because ultimately, as somebody on the sidelines, you're like, regardless of some of the things that get said during those heated discussions, you're like, wow, what a movie that you got people arguing over these details, and you gotta at least appreciate the power of the film.
Yep.
Let's see here. Let's keep scrolling. I'm just trying to find. This is obviously just giving you a idea of some of the dangers.
Right.
The Indy faces with no. Yeah, he's like you kind of know. It's like, yeah, I kind of expected, even though he might get surprised sometimes. But he's like, oh yeah, I should have saw that coming. But he just goes. Yeah, he goes for it. Like, he doesn't care. Like, he's like, yeah, that's what I signed up for.
He anticipated the booby traps, but he didn't quite know what to expect from them. So.
Correct. Like, he was comfortable with what he didn't know. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's the confidence, right? It's just like that confidence, that air of confidence that Indy has. That's like, for a guy, you're like, wow, I want to be like that. And maybe for somebody like watching, like you can see in early on when he's he's teaching the course, he has a student there that has "love you," written on, with love on one eyelid and you on the other eyelid. Like, you can see why she's attracted to this guy. He's like, this guy knows his stuff. I don't know.
I can tell you, as a college professor, I have never seen that on a student's eyelid. So.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, or maybe you just didn't notice it, right? I mean, that's
only in movies.
Somebody just was giving you the signals, and not that you would act on that, but I'm just saying, right. For the most part, maybe you just missed them. And I say that because that's probably something I would do. So you get that situation. It was like, wow, in hindsight, that person was totally hitting on me.
Yeah,
and I had no idea. I think that just comes with being a nerd. To be honest.
Yep, I think so.
So, again, this one's more of a lighted photo, and everybody kind of knows what was happening in this scene, and you get to see a fez here, on the gentleman behind him. But yeah, this is just show you like the idea of when you see when you see how lighting is used in certain shots, it almost seems like a different hat.
I know.
It's the same hat, but just the lighting, and you're like, wow, it just looks different. It's like it could be a different hat.
But you're right. It's just the way the felt and the color reacts to the lighting, whether it's direct sunlight, whether it's inside on a set in a studio.
Yeah.
It just.
Yeah, the movie
was
one of those that I really harped in on how lighting, because you could see how they use these subtle lighting things, and then the hat looks just completely different. So that's why I like when I see some of these changes in the scenes with lighting. It always catches my eye, because I'm like, wow, if you didn't know any better, you'd be like, well, maybe a different hat altogether, a different color. Let's see here. Obviously, this is kind of this might be kind of a behind the scenes, kind of two actors, being chummy. But you can see here, the thing I love about this is you can see how beat up the hat is. Indy's hat is. Like, this hat has gone through stuff.
Yep. And that, I think, among the Indy hat fans, the Streets of Cairo hat is probably their most favorite. It's not mine. because it has some very distinctive features to it. And
Yeah.
if you go on Herbert Johnson's website, they will offer the Streets of Cairo hat as a separate style of Raiders hat.
Yeah.
And I won't go into it. I mean, it's got the Raiders turn, and it's got I think the ribbon is cinched a little bit tighter to give it some kind of this misshapen look. It comes down to the way the hat was handled and treated, and in what shape it was in by the time they were filming this scene. But for many, this is the iconic Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Not for me, but it's
I still love it. It's one of those things. Obviously, some of us collectors, we're like, if I saw my hat like that, first of all, I wouldn't buy it like that. Second of all, if it came like that, somebody's got hell to pay, right? Like, no way I'll let any of my hats look like this.
Right. But they'll go out of their way to put Fuller's Earth on it to make it look exactly like that.
Correct.
And hey, that's great. That's all part of enjoying the hat in the film.
Yeah, agreed. And that's one of those things where I'm like, the fans of the Aussie hats, right? Like the Akubras, the hats that are meant to be out there and worn hard and put away wet, right? Like that whole terminology.
That describes that.
Yeah, like this guy doesn't like this. This is why he chose this thing. He knew what he was going to get into, and he's like, I don't care, and he still looks good. Like just like Lawless, where they wear the hat, like you see the hats with the worn holes in them, and it still looks good.
Yeah.
And I think that was the last indie photo, but I'll go into obviously the other fedora where the primary fedora wearer on the villain side was Tote. And just to contrast here, because we talked about color, you get here at Tote a very, very similar style fedora, right? I'm assuming this is also a Herbert Johnson. I could be wrong.
I think it was. I think it was.
Yeah, it might even be the same style, but it's all black, and it completely changes. Besides this is another character, which it very much is another character in the movie. It's a completely menacing hat.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see here, it's like, it's pretty much the same hat, it's just all black.
Right. It does have brim binding on it.
Okay, got it. There you go.
But I think, because he's so well dressed, it really fits in. Indy doesn't have brim binding, and I'm not sure I would feel the same way about the hat if his hat had brim binding, because it just doesn't seem as rugged, I guess. So this is a more refined hat because I don't want to say a refined villain, but it fits his aesthetic.
Yeah, he's detailed, right? The idea of, right, so this is a German character, and then we kind of know like the stereotypes of like the German precision, right? And this character is very much like in using that stereotype to its, this character is using that to their advantage of like the whole outfit, right? Just like Indy, right? The Indy's whole outfit is not just the hat, it's the whole outfit. For Tote, you get that idea of this is kind of a Gestapo-like villain, right? That Gestapo look. This guy is like precise. He's maniacal. He's also tenacious, right? Like you get somebody, like you get a feel for this character that he will go as far as Indy will to be able to go get his hands on this prize, on this Ark.
Right.
And it provides that perfect foil. It's like, oh man, Indy's in trouble now.
In some ways, he's kind of a shadow Indy.
Yeah, right. Like Bizarro Indy, right?
Bizarro Indy, yeah.
Yeah, he's Bizarro Indy. If you put it in Superman terms, he's Bizarro Indy. And you can see here, if you didn't need just the costume, look at the faces, right? The contortion.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is a maniacal villain. Like, I love it because Lawless also had, forget the name of the gentleman in Lawless, but, I even forget the actor's name. But if you guys remember Lawless, that villain reminded me so much of Tote, except, I don't think he wore a hat because he had this kind of like slick back hairdo. And that's what I imagine if you see Tote without a hat, which I can't remember if we see him without a hat, but you could imagine that if he did have no hat, if he had hair, he would have a slicked back, very like tightly slicked back hairdo.
Yeah.
And that's why I got to imagine, I don't know for sure if that character was patterned after Tote, but it makes sense if you're like, okay, let me draw a picture of a maniacal villain, all black, and they got this kind of facial expression with the round, right? The round glasses.
Yeah.
Like
He does take his head off once.
Gotcha.
He takes it off and uses a handkerchief to wipe the sweat off of his forehead.
Gotcha. Do
And
we
I
know
think his hair is slicked back.
It was slicked back. There you go. See? There you go. I don't even remember the scene, but I'm like, okay, this guy has a slicked back, very tightly slicked back hairdo. Because again, it also reminds me of the villain in Lawless. And you're like, yep, that's what I would do. And then you see here, like, and then the shadow, right? Obviously the lighting, like you see how the lighting plays into, like here is perfect. You see that little bit of that light on his face. It makes him look like a jack-o'-lantern, and it makes him look that much more evil. And then obviously the black fedora and the whole outfit, just like, all right, this is a badass guy. Like, don't mess with this guy.
Yep.
And we see here, obviously, this is kind of like towards the end of the movie. And you know, if you watch this movie, hopefully you're not somebody that hasn't watched this movie yet, and you're not worried about spoilers. But you can see here, this is kind of like right up to when it spells the doom, right? To use it in indie tooth version. This is the kind of right before their doom. And that's the part also that is part of this movie, is that it's very much like teaching the audience, right? It's like a morality lesson for the audience in respecting culture and respecting like the occult and respecting the supernatural, right? Because that's what these other characters are not doing that Indy does. He at least has a modicum of respect, and that's actually what saves him and Marion at the end, is that, yeah, we got to respect this power, right? It's power that's trying to be exploited by these villains for the good of Germany, right? This is obviously pre-World War II Germany, and right, the Nazi regime is trying to use this to try to get world domination. So it has that like element of like realism there, right, in terms of the times, right, 1936, but also, you know, this idea, this morality lesson of you got to respect the unknown, you got to respect culture, right, other cultures. And I couldn't help it. And you see that a lot throughout the 80s, right? And throughout the 80s, it was very classic to go and give a morality lesson to the audience, right? I think the 90s kind of broke away from that. I know Quentin Tarantino made that point exactly, that the 80s were all about a character like, you know, typically played by Bill Murray, right? Bill Murray was always a character in the 80s that he did some bad stuff, like in Scrooge. He was a guy that did bad stuff, but at the end, he ended up becoming good, right? He learned his lesson and turned a page. I think Stripes was another one.
Yep.
Bill Murray starts off as this like no good Nick, and all of a sudden at the end, he's kind of leading things and becoming the exemplar.
Yeah.
And that was typified by the 80s. Like in the 90s, you started seeing the rise of these more morally ambiguous characters, kind of like Balok. They were more like the characters that you would see in Balok, where you're like, well, is this guy bad? Is he good? Like, you kind of don't know.
Right.
Good.
Well, I was going to say, you know, I think the reason you see that in the 80s is because it's a reaction to the films of the 70s. The 70s really picked up on the late 60s ideas of the anti-hero and morally ambiguous.
Correct.
You know, not the pure-hearted hero. And so I'm not saying that the 80s was a backlash to that. It's a reaction where, you know, we're moving on from the 70s. Now we're in a new era. So we're going to give you these more morally pure characters.
Yeah.
And then I think with the 90s, you go the other way again. You know, it's kind of the way again.
Man, I love that. That's a great point. I didn't think of that, but when you stated it, I'm like, yes, absolutely. Obviously, you had the what was referred to as the blaxploitation era, right? You had you know, with the martial arts, you had the Bruceploitation era, and then just beyond that, you had these characters that, right? Obviously, you had a lot of like nudity, a lot of like morally questionable things that were being shown on film. And it was almost in the way like the 80s were kind of like cleansing themselves of a lot of these things that were being shown on the big screen in the 70s. And then the 90s went right back to it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just look at the God.
Maybe the 90s might even like try to be, maybe the morality was still there, but just a little bit less like over the top as it was, as it was in the 80s.
80s, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. It just gives you a lot to chew on, because for me, Al Pacino was one of those characters that really did, because everybody always talked about, and I mentioned this on stream, about how De Niro compares to, let's say, to Pacino. And for me, I always give the nod to Pacino, because Pacino always seemed to play these characters that were morally ambiguous. You had Scarface, obviously Michael Corleone, Lefty Guns in Donnie Brasco. You had these characters. You're like, is this guy good or is he bad? Like, you don't know. But De Niro, it was almost kind of like you didn't see it as often, even though he did have some characters that were kind of morally ambiguous. It's just like Pacino seemed to gravitate. Like when people thought of those roles, they thought of Pacino. So I always gave nod to Pacino, because for me, they just have a lot more texture, those characters.
Right.
But,
well, I mean, just look at the first Godfather and the difference between Michael and his father.
Yeah.
You can see that. And interesting with the Corleone family, they're mafia. They are killing people. You wouldn't consider them morally upstanding.
Correct.
But yet, Don Corleone had a line he would not cross. We're not going to sell drugs. And that kind of defines him. And so I think that, in some ways, that's why you're then rooting for that family, even though you wouldn't consider them good guys,
Right. Correct.
So.
Correct. Yeah. Obviously, this is not a treatise on Godfather, but obviously a lot of things go back to the Godfather because it was so influential, right? So it was so, obviously you had the elements of the Greek tragedy, but after it came out, it became so influential in how other people tried to do film. So, it makes perfect sense why we always kind of go right back to that movie.
Right.
I'll spare those folks, and try to keep it on topic. But
let's talk about
last, that's the last of the Toad character. But then we have, like we mentioned, Balok, which is right. Like he's not the super evil villain that Toad is, but he's kind of somewhere in the middle, right? Maybe closer to Toad than he is to Indy. But this is very much a peer, right? This is a peer of Indy that somehow like went a little too far in terms of selling. Let's call it selling out, right? Mm-hmm. He's a Frenchman, I believe. René's Balok, and you can see right in the beginning, right? He's always seeming to try to get seemingly getting the best of Indiana Jones. Like Indy's very weary of this guy because he knows that René, that Balok will go farther, and he's a little bit more sinister than he will ever be. Because Indy has that kind of like that moral compass that Balok doesn't seem to have.
Right.
And he even like mocks him for it. Like once at the end he gets through and gets the statue, he's like, well, you're just not as cunning as I am. You're not willing to go as far as me. He's like, and Indy, of course, acknowledges like, yeah, you would,
Right.
You gotta love it. And you can see in the uniform, right? Very much like, okay, this guy is in the same, like you could tell he's a competitor. He's a rival, somebody that's in the sphere, but obviously he's not cut from the same cloth as Indy.
Right.
So it also makes an intriguing character, right? I thought it was really interesting that we have essentially, I think, 3 villainous characters here in various shades, right? We got Toad, we got Balok, and then you also have Colonel Dietrich, which, I don't really focus on here because it's not like he wears a hat, but it's more military. So I didn't really like cover him, but he's kind of like, we have like a 3-headed monster of villains here.
And it's funny that it takes that many to go toe to toe with Indy.
Correct. Yeah. I love that because you're absolutely right. Like the audience is viewing this and like, wow, this guy's facing this 3-headed monster, right? Kind of like Godzilla facing King Ghidorah, right? The 3-headed monster, the literal 3-headed monster. And you're like, man, how's he going to do it? How's he going to do it? I love it.
It's what makes the movie so fascinating. They could have easily just gone with Dietrich as the bad guy, for instance, because it's the Nazis.
Correct.
Or or Tote,
Yeah.
and have him and Indy go at it the whole film.
Right.
But by introducing Renee in there, somebody that is almost like Indy, but isn't, and that is more, yeah, maybe he's a little more morally ambiguous.
Yeah.
You know, because obviously with Nazis as enemies, they're evil. You know, there's no moral ambiguity there, and so it would have been less interesting if you had just had the Nazis as the sole villain. So it's nice of them to introduce this professional competitor of Indy's.
Yeah, agreed. Because it just really provides kind of like that spectrum. Because, you know, with Dietrich, you know, and this is something that I didn't plan to go into, but his character is intriguing because you're like, this is his job. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things like you almost kind of in many ways give Dietrich a pass because he's like, well, what is he going to do? Not do this? Like, he'd have to like go back home and like face the consequences. This is literally his job. To be able to go and follow the orders of the Nazi regime. But yeah, I think it just provides a little bit of that spectrum of villainous villainy. I guess villainy would be the word.
Villainy.
I'm gonna say villainy. But yeah, I just really thought that was really cool because some other. A lot of other films, you'll see this one guy and they'll spend all their capital, their villain capital, I guess, for lack of a better term, on one
capital. I love that term.
Yeah.
Villain capital.
Yeah. They'll spend all their villain capital on one character. It's like, I just really love that they actually spread the love, not just in different characters, but also different countries of origin, right? So obviously we talked about Germany, we talked about France, right? And then obviously Indy represents the U.S. And then the next character that we'll talk about, but will be, did I say that? Salah, right?
Yeah.
Salah. Yeah. Salah represents Egypt. And we'll get to that a little bit. But what I wanted to do is show some more photos of Balok here because he does wear a fedora.
Yep.
Throughout most of the film.
It's a Panama hat, but still a fedora.
Correct. And that was the thing. It's like when I was watching the film at certain angles, and maybe it was because of the lighting, it was a little harder for me to tell. I was like, because every time I see a white hat with a let's say a black band, a black ribbon, I automatically think Panama. But I had to actually look at this hat, and it could have been just a function of like my eyesight and maybe my TV resolution. But in certain angles, it's like it didn't look like a Panama. It almost looked like a regular felt fedora, but it was white. But yeah, honestly, I didn't even know. Like when coming into this, I'm glad you mentioned this because I wasn't completely sure if it was a Panama or a fedora based on the angles that I kept seeing.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. I mean, given the color scheme, my stereotype has always been that's got to be a Panama.
Yeah. And it's a sensible hat for Egypt, compared to a felt fedora.
Correct. So it goes to show you, like, this is a guy, and it adds to kind of his cunningness, right? Like, this guy is prepared. Like, right, Indy's a little stubborn, but, Balok is like, no, I'm going to be smart about this. And it also makes him look sophisticated.
Exactly.
That's the part of Balok that you get that differentiates him from obviously Dietrich, who's wearing a military uniform, and Tote, who's obviously just looking like a maniacal villain. This guy is like this suave villain, right? Like he's obviously got the French accent going. Like this is very much like almost maybe a little bit even more like a James Bondish type villain.
Right.
The sophisticated. That would be probably
sophisticated. The word. Yeah. Whereas, Indy's rough around the edges. There's no question there.
Correct. And I think the color, right? The light colored hat as well as with the light colored kind of a suit pairing, right? The blazer with the light colored everything. It really does. Like this is a suave, sophisticated villain. Obviously very ambitious and very cunning, very smart, but sophisticated, right? Like he's the guy that he could get out of a jam by like sweet talking his way out of a situation,
Yeah. I could see
Yeah.
that.
So I love that. I love the way. And again, for me, if you put a different color in this guy, you might not see that. And that's why I love the costuming for these
Yeah.
characters.
Perfect choices.
Yeah. And you can see here again, just you look at it. This guy's like, he looks very professorial, or like this guy's a big deal, Let's see, we'll have more angles. He wears this kind of color outfit throughout. So you can see it in all these different angles. And you can see here, this is kind of like when he's meeting Indy for the second time, right? Obviously, he stole the statue from Indy in the beginning. And Indy, you could tell this guy, he's rubbing Indy the wrong way. Like, he doesn't even want to be here next to him. He's like, I just want to punch you in the face, dude.
It's great acting by Harrison Ford.
Yeah. And you could tell that Balok is aware of this, and he loves it. He's enjoying this. He's enjoying that he's getting under Indy's skin. And I just love the chemistry between these two guys on screen.
And the watch,
Yeah. Yes.
I'm talking about, you bury this in $10 on the street from a vendor, you bury it in the sand for 1,000 years. And
it's a message. It's like, aren't you aware? Because it's in many ways, he's trying to educate Indy, right? So beyond beyond like obviously besting him for these heirlooms, for these prizes, what he's trying to tell him is like, dude, you're thinking the wrong way about this. This is just stupid stuff that was buried somehow long ago, and you're making too big of a deal. Like, your reverence towards these items is unfounded.
Yeah.
Like, he's talking down to him. He's like,
right.
This is the reason why you always lose, is because you just don't know any better. And you can tell it just grates on Indy.
Yeah. And, and he's saying, you are like me. We are, he does say we are much alike. And so, he's trying, it's almost like he's trying to push Indy to cross that line that Indy just will not cross.
Right. Yeah. And in many ways, he's kind of, he's giving that, building that rapport with him. Like we're similar, except I go above and beyond like what you would do. And if you just learn this lesson, well, you could be like me. You could be as good as I am or better. But, and you can tell it just really pisses off Indy, and like that face that he gives is priceless. I just love that face that Indy's putting on the scene.
That was a great point, Nathan.
Yeah, agreed. And this is like the thing. We don't really cover Marion here. I didn't show a lot of photos, but obviously Marion is a very interesting character because, well, besides the fact that they had a love, right? There was a romantic past with Indy and Marion. There's also a professional connection because Marion happens to be the daughter of Abner, Ravenwood, I believe her last name, right? And that was Indy's mentor. Yeah, like, this is the guy that taught Indy. Yeah, and you gotta love that connection. And obviously, she socks him in the face. So you can see that even though, like, obviously nobody enjoys getting socked, you're kind of like, wow, Indy must have really did a number on her, right? Romantic to get that ire out of Marion, and it just makes you like appreciate that I guess the kind of that romantic side of Indy that he could get that kind of attention from this woman. So I don't know. I thought it was really a nice way of giving you an insight into Indy without having to show you something.
Right. So. Yeah, and they didn't have to say a whole lot about it.
Yeah.
I love the scene where they introduce Marion. You find out she's owning this bar and she wins the drinking contest.
Yes.
She's no pushover. She is going to stand up and be an equal to Indy in many ways.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because for me, this movie I'm pretty sure predates the original Alien, right? Sigourney Weaver? Really? Because for me, Sigourney Weaver was one of those characters in movies, like the movies of the 80s, that was that strong female, right? Now, again, Sigourney Weaver was the lead. Marion's not the lead in this movie, but that idea of the strong female character, I think that scene that you highlighted when we first see Marion drinking a competitor under the table and besting the competitor like really highlight, wow, this is a strong, badass woman.
Yeah.
And then when she goes and has this emotional reaction to Indy, it goes to show you what kind of person Indy was, because look at what kind of a badass Marion is. Indy went and broke her heart.
Yeah.
I love that tension and how they built those characters, again, without having to show you all of what happened, like in a flashback or something cheesy like that. They told you everything you need to know with those, like, kind of those scenes.
Right.
And one last photo of Balok. Obviously, you have him here on screen. You can see the comparison, right, of his look compared to Toad.
Yeah.
You know, again, they're both technically on the same side, but very, very different types of villains.
And which one's the smarter one? The way they're dressed in Egypt, you know, out in the desert.
Yeah,
the guy in solid black.
Balok
or the
is
guy in the light colors.
more adaptable, you know?
Yeah.
and again, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know. You know, some people, they view adaptability as kind of a weakness. They're like, no, you got to tough things through. But, you know, I'm a big believer in working smarter, not harder.
Right.
In which case, it makes me appreciate Balok's, you know, adaptability. And then obviously the next character here, so that's the last of Balok. We got Salah. And Salah is, like, again, he's an Egyptian. He is you know, he's an explorer, right? He's an excavator. He is a staunch ally of Indy. He actually saves Indy's life at some point in the film. Well, probably more than one point, but the one that I remember right off the bat was with the date, right?
The dates, yeah.
And, Indy was about to go and throw the date in the air and catch in his mouth. He grabs it. He's like, he noticed the dead monkey. He's like, hey, that's a bad date.
Yeah.
And that was kind of one of those 80s one-liners. That's a bad date.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, all right, that could have been said by Schwarzenegger, because, you know, like in a Schwarzenegger, those killer one-liners, those cheesy one-liners in the 80s, you know?
Yep.
But, you know, Salah very much is kind of like he represents the culture, right? Like, this is all, right? This is the home culture. He's an Egyptian, and you can see that reflected in his headwear throughout. And you can see here, right? Again, you know, I don't know if this would classify as a turban. Like, when I saw this, I thought of it as a turban, but I don't know if that's appropriate for this, right? So I just call it headwear, Egyptian headwear.
I'm not sure what the correct terminology is.
Correct. So hopefully somebody that watches this at some point that knows the correct term. I don't want to, like I said, I'm saying this because of my ignorance. When I saw this, like, okay, I'm going to call this a turban, but it's probably not a turban. But I just call it Egyptian headwear. So for me, without knowing, I'm like, okay, this is appropriate to the Egyptian culture. And you can see him throughout the movie wearing this headwear. Now there is one photo that I want to show you here, and I don't remember. I think this is from the movie. He wears this. I'm going to call it a Panama. It's definitely not shaped. He's got the brim up. But it looks good. It looks like, you know, I like the look on Salah. But it's a little bit more of the non-traditional kind of headwear. And we talked about the fez, you know, and I'll show that photo later on. But I really like this because it does also, again, he has a very similar color scheme to, you know, to, oh, wow. Balok. Wow, I had a moment there. Sorry. To Balok, very similar color schemes, but again, obviously a good guy. He represents kind of like the morality of somebody that's in the business, but he's there very respectful, even more so than Indy, because this is an artifact in his home, right? This is kind of like he knows all the stories. He probably grew up listening to all the stories surrounding the Ark and the Ark of the Covenant, and he's there representing, like, you got to have this level of respect, my man, right? And it's a very, like, warm character, right? He's, like I said, very, very loyal, very warm character, and I think it was really brilliantly played, a really brilliantly played role. The actor's name is John Rhys Davies, and I think he's appeared in other films. I'm not recalling those films, but he's one of those guys you look on screen, he's like, okay, I know him from somewhere. I just can't place him.
So many people know him as Gimli the dwarf from Lord of the Rings. So.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, there you go. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah.
You see? Again, he just has one of those. I mean, at first when I see him, he has like a very Dom DeLuise kind of like look to him, you know.
Yeah.
But obviously not Dom DeLuise. But yeah, he's like, this guy is like, you could tell he's very much a good guy, very sweet, and he just has like one of those sympathetic faces. And here, and again, I don't know if this photo is from Raiders. When I saw this photo, I'm like, he looks pretty young, but this could have been from The Last Crusade, to be honest.
This one is from Last Crusade.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But I had to show a photo of the Fez because for me, like the Fez in that color scheme, again, it really does. Like if you mentioned that there was at least one scene that he had a Fez in Raiders.
I think he does. I could be wrong.
Yeah, it could be wrong. I mean, regardless, the Fez would fit perfectly because just the color scheme, right? We'll talk about the contrast. We had the brown, we had the black, and the white. The red, we talked about the power of red, right? It's something that screams tradition, right? We talked about a lot of like the Chinese headwear that we reviewed in past shows. And there was another, besides the Carmen Sandiego hat that I have here, fedora that I have here, but we talked about how red and like some of the kind of feelings and emotions that they evoke. I think the Fez really hits home, and maybe these, if they didn't have it in the Raiders, maybe this is kind of like those refinements that we talked about that happened in subsequent movies, because like, okay, now we're gonna go and we're gonna hit a home run with the costuming, and it's just like the Fez really makes me feel good about like how they went full circle with everything.
Yeah.
So
going back to the turban real quick.
Yeah.
I was going to point out that you also get the feeling that it's, even though it's a traditional headwear in Egypt, that it's not what he normally wears, and that he probably doesn't, because you see him with the straw hat and the suit and tie, and he is definitely more of a modern aesthetic.
Yeah.
But he and Indy wears the same costume. They're blending in so they can, sneak around the Nazis and look for the Ark. So I'm surprised you didn't get a picture of Indy with the turban in here too.
Yeah. I think that was one of those that I might have not been able to, like, again, usually I'll go to IMDb to source a lot of photos, but I had to put a pause on that because they had almost 500 photos
in
the IMDb of the movie. And I'm not surprised. It's one of those iconic movies, but I'm like, okay, I can't sift through 500 photos. I don't have that attention span to begin with. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and try to, for this one, shy away from IMDb, but I'm sure they had it. 500 photos, man.
Yeah.
And so that's in terms of movie photos. But Brad, you were kind enough to donate some photos. So hopefully, I know we didn't go into the kind of the full backstory, but I wanted to share some photos of Brad that he shared in his Indy fedora here. And obviously, if you can't tell, this must have been let's say more than a couple years ago.
Yeah, it was summer of 1984, and I was 17.
Wow. Wow. Love it. Yeah, talk us through kind of what Brad's up to, his inspiration for this look. I love it. They're great photos.
Well, I mean, you can kind of tell it's 80s from the colors that I'm wearing and the shirt and stuff. But, Raiders of the Lost Ark in 81 was really life-changing in a way. And I didn't know it at the time. But it's where I got my love of hats. And I've talked about this before with you. I had a Lone Ranger hat when I was a little kid, and my mom sewed a Lone Ranger costume for Halloween one year. And so I liked hats, and I had, cowboy hats as a kid. But when Raiders came out, I fell in love with the hat. And then in 84, of course, Temple of Doom had come out in May. And in June, then my mom took me and my brother and sister there to Europe for
Yeah.
5 weeks. And my brother and I said, well, you know what? We need some Indiana Jones hats to wear because
Yeah.
it's an adventure. So we went downtown Denver to Cottrell's, which was a classic men's store. And they had
Yeah.
a whole wall of Stetson dress hats and things like that. And we picked out these identical models. They weren't called, it wasn't, this was before the Temple came out.
Yeah.
I don't know what model they were, but to us, they look the closest to an Indy hat, though they do have black ribbons on them.
Yeah.
And so we got those hats, and I wore it all through the trip. My brother took his off from time to time, but
Yeah.
I wore mine. And I'll talk a little bit after we're done with the photos about my evolution here. But
Yeah.
obviously we were at the Tower of London with the Beefeaters
Yeah.
there. This is Loch Ness up in Scotland.
That's Loch Ness. Wow.
Yep. And my brother has his hat on too.
I
And
love it.
we were wearing satchels instead of backpacks because that's part of the Indy look. I didn't have
Yeah.
a leather jacket, so I wore what I had, my windbreaker, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I was still going for the Indy look.
Yeah. You guys look sharp. Wow. What a
Oh,
great
thanks.
photo. Man. Loch
And
Ness.
the next one is kind of my favorite. This is on the at the end of our trip. We were coming back from the Isle of Wight on the ferry, and
Yeah.
had this picture taken. I love that shot.
That's a great shot. Man, it really just, you get to see the whole silhouette, the whole profile of the hat. Wow. That looks sharp. And it makes you look, again, I don't did you say how old you were in the photo?
17.
17. Yeah, it makes
17.
you look older. Like you look a lot older with the fedora. I get that
It
all the
does,
time.
doesn't it?
But yeah.
Yeah.
When you're 17, sometimes depending on how you are, if you're 17 like I was, where I looked 40 when I was 17, I'm like, I don't need to look older. But a lot of folks, I think that might be the allure for a lot of like younger folks, that for the fedora, it makes them look older, and people will treat you a lot more, I guess, as an adult when you have
Right.
a fedora.
Yeah,
So
I
if you
think
young
so.
folks out there want to get a little bit treated a little bit more like an adult, maybe that fedora.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
You said you want to talk about the evolution. I love it. Let me remove the slideshow, and you could talk a little bit about the evolution.
Yeah, there were a couple of things I thought of I wanted to talk about when you
Yeah,
brought up this film as the subject for today.
yeah,
And one of them is, so many people, I think, develop their love of hats from this film, and
yeah,
I'm one of them. I will, make no apologies for it.
yeah,
But it also led me partly on the career path I am now,
yeah.
because it was either 99 or 2000, I decided, my old Stetson Indy hat that I had doesn't fit anymore. My gray one got eaten by silverfish. I'd like to get a
Yeah.
good Indy hat. And
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about the Indy hats at the time. I didn't know who made them, where to get them. So I started researching online, and I ran across Indy Gear,
Yeah.
which is a website dedicated to Indiana Jones and his costume.
Yeah.
And so that's where I started researching the Indy hat and finding out, oh, it was a Herbert Johnson. And, there were very few hatters at that point
Right.
that had started to take up the, amateurs. Art Fawcett was the big one. Steve
Yeah.
Delk was coming along at that point. And, I was a member of their forum, Club Obi-Wan. I still am. But,
Wow.
that's where I started learning about the Indy hat. But there was an offshoot of Indy Gear created in either 2003 or 2004, the Fedora Lounge.
Gotcha.
And so I went over to the Fedora Lounge and ended up spending more of my time there.
Yeah.
So much so I ended up becoming a moderator for a long time. I was a
Wow.
mod for years there. And and I've shared this part with you before. I started to become a fan of William Powell. and his films.
Yeah.
And so maybe those would be some films you might want to talk about, the Thin Man and stuff. And that's where I learned, you know, William Powell has this hat that has this brim edge that I haven't seen before because it's not an overwelt, a standard overwelt.
Yeah.
And I found out it was a Kavanaugh edge.
Right.
And I said, well, where can I get a hat with a Kavanaugh edge? Because now I want a William Powell style hat. And they said, well, you can't get one. They don't make them anymore. And I said, well, why not? And that's what started me on my journey to research how you make hats. And it led me down that rabbit hole where I, you know, researched everything I could about Kavanaugh, Crowfoot and Knapp, Dobbs, Hat Corporation of America, to where I'm now, you know, a hat historian. And, you know, people like the Stetson Company are reaching out to me for information. So, if it hadn't been for my interest in finding a new indie hat, a good indie hat, I wouldn't have found the Fedora Lounge, and I wouldn't have found my calling with, you know, hat research. Now, I was still becoming a college professor at that point in history. And it was only one of my research interests, but, you know, I've been researching hats now for over 25 years. And it really is, in many ways, thanks to Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark that hat historians. So that's why I wanted to get in on this talk and say, you know, a lot of archaeologists say we got into archaeology because of Indiana Jones. I got into, you know, hat history because of Indiana Jones as well. So.
It goes to show you, Brad, the power of film, right? Because I obviously I'm somebody that I've given a lot of kudos to Rocky, the Rocky film, for like dictating a lot of my style. You know, again, I didn't become a boxer. I always liked boxing because pugilism was always something that, you know, growing up as a Puerto Rican, you know, we had a very storied tradition in the world of boxing. And then I from there, I got into mixed martial arts in terms of viewing, not fighting, because I don't want to get punched in the face or kicked. You know, definitely don't like
I hear you.
But, you know, Rocky was one of those films. And obviously, you know, martial arts films, you got Bruce Lee, you know, a lot of his philosophy that I started reading about after I became a big fan of the films. You know, I got to say, between those two guys, those are folks, again, I became a researcher, but besides just research, you know, my style as well as how I approach life, like Bruce Lee was very integrative. You know, in his philosophies and in his styles and his teachings, right? Big fan of, you know, studied philosophy at the University of Washington, as well as kind of a fighter philosopher. And like, we all have these inspirations, and that's what it goes to show you, right? So the idea of life imitating art, you know, and maybe not one-to-one, right? Right? You obviously didn't become an archaeologist. I didn't become a boxer, but we were influenced by these very, very powerful movies. Right, yours, you know, let's just say the 80s, Rocky was something that was actually before I was born, the original Rocky, but I got to know Rocky from the subsequent films, and then I went back and watched, you know, Rocky. And, you know, and for me, I probably had to put Rocky 2 as, you know, like that style kind of like, you know, that style apex. But, you know, Rocky, the original Rocky, is obviously a much more influential film, probably a superior film in terms of art. But the whole point in all this is that this is a very, very powerful medium of you know, of art, right? So, you know, filmmaking, regardless of how a lot of folks feel, it is an art. Photography is an art. You know, it's just as much an art. And, you know, it's because a lot of these things, right? Obviously, you know, I don't know how much of Indiana Jones is based on, you know, real events, but Rocky is very kind of autobiographical in terms of the struggles that Stallone was facing in trying to get into Hollywood, right? He was very much facing an uphill battle. So even though he wasn't a boxer, he poured a lot of himself into this character of Rocky. And, you know, it really is very powerful in terms of how it shapes you know, how we are, you know, especially as youth, you know, watching films and how we take those things into adulthood. So I love the fact, even though I can't say that Indiana Jones influenced me as much as Rocky, I really do, especially as a hat person, have come to really respect the influence and the power that this whole film franchise has had on creating enthusiasm within the hobby, and also creating the kernel of wanting to learn more. Because, you know, again, I'm a big believer, we're both big believers in knowledge, right? The knowledge is power. And how much, you know, as an educator, as researchers, you really can't give a film much higher credit than it wants people to want to learn more and to know more and to be better. That's the highest form of art in my opinion.
That's the power of art, the power of film.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the next point then that I wanted to bring up is that, you know, throughout the history of hats, at least 19th and 20th century, it's pop culture that has driven a lot of what we think of as hats today. And I don't think we think of it in that sense. But yet, you know, once you reflect on it, it's like, well, yeah, you know, our, you know, movie stars, we like to emulate them. So it makes sense that people are going to dress like that. But, you know, I touched on this just a little bit in my most recent video, and I'm working on another one that I'll talk more about this. But we have the term fedora for these hats today because of pop culture. Because people went absolutely nuts in the United States for the play, not a film, but the play Fedora by Victor Sardou. And they wanted anything that was branded Fedora. So, you know, you have scenario like you would see today with, you know, movie tie-ins and licensing, and you know, there's all kinds of products coming out. Well, it was the same thing back then when Fedora came out. Dressmakers were selling dresses called Fedora. They were selling scarves, shoes. You know, a lot of in women's fashion. They may not have had anything to do with the play, but because people love the play, it's like, oh, we can make some money off of this. And, you know, this is where Knox comes in with the first Fedora. And I'll talk in that other video, but it was not the actress wearing a man's hat. That whole thing is a myth. And I debunked that on my website. But but because men wanted a hat called a fedora, Knox offered that. And it became so popular that everybody copied it. And while it was originally a particular style of hat that doesn't really look like this, over time, that word is associated with a soft felt hat. So you've got a fedora and I've got a fedora, even though they're clearly different styling slightly. But, you know, that's the power of pop culture. And the industry never called it that. They never called it a fedora. You know, it was just a snap brim hat, soft felt hat. But in the public's mind, it's a fedora. And the same thing happens with Trilby. Because Trilby is also a play that is popular in the United States, and people go crazy for it. And so they start selling clothes labeled Trilby, hats called Trilbys. And again, it's just a soft felt hat. That's all it is. It's not a narrow brimmed hat like we think of today. And in fact, I've got a newspaper article where the British make fun of the Americans for going crazy over Trilby. It's like, why are they obsessed with that play and you know, calling everything Trilby? But then the British go through their own Trilby phase where they're going crazy for all of these Trilby labeled things. And so they pick up the term Trilby for a soft felt hat. And so Fedora makes more of a statement over here. Trilby makes more of a statement over there. Today, we've differentiated them into two different styles of hats. Originally, they never were. They were same. So, you know, that's the power of pop culture. And so when you get a film like Indiana Jones coming out, you know, we hadn't seen men wearing hats in a long time. And so it's almost a novelty. And it reminds us of, you know, the old gangster films of the 30s and 40s. And in fact, you know, people still equate the style of hat with a gangster. or your Kavanaugh.
Right.
They'll still think of the 30s and that. Or if it's obviously brown, it's indie.
Right.
And then you have the same thing happen in 1980 with cowboy hats and urban cowboy.
Right.
There's a revival in fedoras because of Indiana Jones. There's a revival in derbies actually because of the film The Apartment, 1960.
Yeah.
Cowboy hats undergo kind of a renaissance in the 1980s because of urban cowboys. So
Yeah.
we really are influenced by popular culture when it comes to what we wear, but especially with hats. And I don't think we can ever separate hats from popular culture.
No, not at all. I mean, I mentioned this, and I'm trying to remember. I was pitched on because I have a dedicated thread, a sticky thread on the Fedora Lounge, and a gentleman just posted requesting a show, I guess based in Australia, that a certain season that had featured, hats. So I was like, all right, well, I've never heard this show, but I'll take it into consideration because obviously we have Boardwalk Empire.
Right.
I mentioned Peaky Blinders.
Peaky Blinders,
The season 3 of the Tulsa King started incorporating more hats. Right, I talked about the villain wearing an open road. So we haven't really gotten into TV shows, but that's also that kind of that flip side to the movies, where you have what's in the big screen or the silver screen, and then you got TV shows, which at some point became a lot more accessible to households, where they didn't have to go to a drive-in or to a movie theater. They could just watch their favorite program and watch influencers, because that's what they were. They were influencers. They still are.
Exactly.
It's just they have more competition now because of social media.
Right.
But these were the folks, right, that were pitching, right? They were pitching cigarettes, right? That's where you had the cigarettes and all those other, like they knew what they were doing, and it worked. It's really easy to see how, obviously Humphrey Bogart is the example, right? Before Indiana Jones, that was an iconic, star of the screen that, so many folks are looking to copy that style. Frank Sinatra would be another one. So, the idea of the power of popular culture in influencing, even though a lot of folks, they get insulted to admit that they're getting influenced, It's like, no, it's fine. It's how human nature works. We're very much about comparing and contrasting, right? We talked about a lot of folks. They might have dad at home. Not everybody was fortunate enough to have, a dad at home. So obviously that would be, your parents would be initial influences. But besides that, at some point you start realizing, okay, there are other folks out there, other adults to emulate. And a lot of them come from the movies and TV shows. Yeah. And, I grew up watching Knight Rider, wanted to be Michael Knight, like that guy, I didn't have a hair helmet, but, Michael Knight had the leather jacket and the cool, badass car. Right. I want to do that. Like, that's how it is.
That's right.
Brad, did you have anything else that you wanted to go over?
No, those are the two things that came to my mind when you said that you wanted to talk about this film. I really enjoyed today. This has been a blast talking about one of my favorite films and how it's influenced not only myself, but you and, the world in general.
Yeah. And hopefully you guys, because I know when I had this show in mind, I knew there was going to be, hopefully a good reaction from the folks on the Fedora Lounge, because I know how widely talked about that film, that film franchise is. So you guys are coming out here. If you're watching this in syndication from the Fedora Lounge, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And obviously this is not the end all and be all of indie, right? But there's other films that I'll cover. Obviously Temple of Doom is something that I definitely want to cover. Last Crusade. I'll at some point try to cover all the indie films because I know how influential they are. So bear with me as I try to go through. And, at some point I'll open up the voting again. And if I get a big enough audience to vote, and we'll start bringing that back, a little bit more democratic way of choosing the films. That way nobody gets left out. And and obviously, if I see a pattern of films that are not getting covered, I'll try to use my powers of discretion to kind of interject, and that way everybody can find a little bit of something in these Fedora Fridays that really hits home. So Brad, I appreciate you joining us for today. And you know what?
Happy to be here.
Yeah, no problem, my friend. It's always a lot of fun to have you on here. It really does. Again, as somebody that I really love this film, but I feel like having you added a lot more credibility to the show. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Glad to help.
Yeah,
I really like what you're doing here. This is great.
Oh, thank you. It's all about fun. So that's why I love when you say you're having fun, because that's what it's all about.
And maybe we can influence people into wearing hats again. Yep.
Exactly. That's the whole point, right? It's like, we're not television stars, we're not movie stars, but we are on social media. So folks are watching us. Hopefully you guys are like, all right, well, that Brad guy looks pretty cool. Let me go and and like I said, that's the lineage from indie to Brad Bowers, to the next hat person. And you gotta love that. That's the way it should be.
Yep.
So I put down Brad's information. Brad has an excellent website. He's going to be in the process of revamping that website over the course of the year. Looking forward to see the changes that you make on the hatprofessor.com. But as it stands right now, there's a wealth of information, especially focused on the Hat Corporation of America. So even if you have a remote interest in Hat Corporation of America, and if you ask me, you should, because it's an iconic brand. It's very much as iconic as Stetson in my mind, and all these other brands that we talked about, like to talk about. And it's again like stepping into a time warp, because this conglomerate doesn't exist anymore, but it was so influential. So definitely check out Brad's website. Obviously, you can find them on Facebook. You can find them on the Fedora Lounge, and support his YouTube channel. I have it linked on my YouTube homepage. Right, Brad happens to be already monetized, but definitely more followers, more viewers is always going to be a good thing. That way we can help his channel grow. You can also help my channel grow.
I'm trying to help your channel grow.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like I said, I appreciate all you guys and how much you guys help get me to where I'm at. I think we're fastly approaching that 100 subscriber mark. I think we're in 88 was the last time I checked. Right. I appreciate all you guys that have hit the subscribe button, and you guys know that I have the giveaway, right? I will be giving away this, again, it's an Alpine looking fedora, not the best looking fedora you're gonna find, a little bit of moth bites, but hopefully it'll also make a nice first fedora, or a 100th fedora, or a first fedora to restore, or just a first fedora to give away, right? You might say, hey, I don't want it, it doesn't fit me, but I have a buddy that always wanted to have a fedora. I'll set you up. After we get to 100 subscribers, we will give this away. And in the meantime, just keep supporting. But you know what I'm going to say, right? Even if you don't support this channel or Brad's channel or any of the other folks that are affiliated with Good Lukes, the one thing you got to do, right? Or else, well, we'll get Indy after you, right? We won't send Poe after you because that's a little too sinister. We'll get Indy after. Maybe you see the whip, right? You see the high crown and the leather jacket, and you respect that. And he won't do anything to you because he's got that moral high ground. He will just go and whoop, hit the subscribe button for you. But even if you don't, the one thing you got to do, stay hatting, my friend. Have a great day. Ciao, everybody.
See ya.